The sun had already begun its slow descent toward the horizon when Vera Thornton realized the stagecoach that was supposed to arrive at noon had still not appeared on the dusty road leading into Deming, New Mexico. And the sinking feeling in her stomach told her something had gone terribly wrong with her carefully laid plans to start her new life as a schoolteacher in this frontier town. She stood near the center of town, her green traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of desert dust, her leather satchel growing heavier with each passing minute. The letter from the school board had been specific about the arrival time and the arrangements, promising that someone would meet her at the stage depot. But here she was, alone and increasingly uncertain, watching the few townspeople who passed by give her curious glances before hurrying on with their business. The livery stable sat across the dusty street, its wide doors open to catch whatever breeze might drift through in the September heat of 1882. Vera could see horses moving in the shadows inside, could hear the occasional whinny or stamp of hooves against packed earth. She had noticed the man working there an hour ago, maybe longer now. He had paused in the doorway once, holding a bridle in his hands, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment before he turned back to his work. Now, as the second hour stretched into the third, Vera felt the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders like the dust that coated everything in this high desert town. She had spent every dollar she could spare to make this journey from St. Louis, following the promise of employment, and a fresh start after her father's death had left her alone in the world at 23. The teaching position was supposed to begin next week, and she had nowhere to stay, no contacts in town besides the name of the school board chairman, whose office she had already tried to visit, only to find it locked and dark. The man at the livery appeared in the doorway again. This time he did not look away. Vera could see him more clearly now in the slanting afternoon light. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting, and he wore the practical clothes of someone who worked with horses. Sturdy trousers, a worn shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and boots that had seen considerable use. He stood there for a long moment, and Vera felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment at being so obviously stranded and helpless. Then he set down whatever tool he had been holding and walked toward her. His stride was easy and confident, and as he crossed the street, Vera noticed the way other people nodded to him in greeting. He was known here, respected perhaps. That observation gave her a small measure of relief. When he stopped in front of her, removing his hat in a gesture of politeness that seemed almost old-fashioned, she could see his eyes were a warm brown, and his face, though weathered by sun and wind, was kind. "Madam," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "Name is Reed Keller. I work at the livery. I could not help but notice you have been standing here quite a while, and I wondered if perhaps you might need some assistance." The simple kindness in his words nearly undid her. Vera had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but this stranger's offer of help cracked something in her careful composure. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall in the middle of this dusty street. "I am Vera Thornton," she managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. "I was supposed to meet someone from the school board. The stagecoach was delayed several days ago in Las Cruces, and I sent a telegram ahead with my new arrival time, but no one has come." Reed nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Today is Saturday. Most of the school board members will be out at their ranches or businesses. Samuel Chen, he is the chairman, usually takes his family out to visit his wife's people on Saturdays. He probably did not get your telegram." "Oh." The single syllable came out smaller than Vera intended. She had not even thought about what day of the week it was. had been so focused on simply getting here that the normal rhythms of small-town life had not occurred to her. "You have a place to stay?" Reed asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The letter said arrangements would be made," Vera said, hearing the helplessness in her own voice and hating it. "I have some money for a hotel, but I do not know which establishments are reputable, and She trailed off, not wanting to admit that she was not entirely certain her remaining funds would stretch far enough if the school board did not honor their commitment quickly. Reed put his hat back on and adjusted it against the sun. "The Deming House Hotel is respectable. Mrs. Patterson runs it, and she does not tolerate any nonsense. But it is Saturday evening, and if you are going to get this sorted out, it will not be until Monday at the earliest. That is a couple of nights at hotel rates and meals besides." Vera felt her throat tighten. He was right, of course. She had just enough money to manage it, but it would leave her with almost nothing if there were any further delays or complications. "I have a proposal," Reed said, and then quickly added, "a respectable one. My sister Ruth keeps house for me. We have a spare room. Used to belong to our younger brother before he headed up to Colorado. Ruth would be pleased to have another woman around, and she will not take money for hospitality. You could stay with us until Monday, when you can get matters settled with the school board." Vera stared at him, trying to process this unexpected offer. Everything she had been taught about propriety screamed that accepting such an invitation from a stranger was wildly inappropriate. But the genuine kindness in Reed Keller's face and the practical wisdom of conserving her limited resources made her hesitate. "I could not impose," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "It is not an imposition. Ruth will be delighted. She has been after me for months to be more social, and bringing home a stranded schoolteacher will probably earn me enough credit to get out of at least 3 church socials." There was a hint of humor in his voice now, and Vera found herself almost smiling despite everything. "Are you certain your sister would not mind? She will probably have the spare room made up and a hot meal on the table before I can finish the introductions. Come on, let me get my things and we will head over to the house. It is not far." Vera found herself nodding, agreeing to this arrangement that she would never have considered back in St. Louis. But this was Deming, New Mexico territory, not Missouri, and clearly different rules applied. Reed picked up her satchel before she could protest, hefting it easily, and gestured for her to follow him back toward the livery. "You own the stable?" she asked as they walked, partly out of curiosity and partly because talking seemed to help settle her nerves. "Co-own it with my business partner, Jack Morrison. He handles most of the smithing work and I manage the rest. Horses, boarding, tack repair, that sort of thing. Jack is up in Santa Fe this week, buying equipment." Reed led her into the cooler shadows of the stable, where the smell of hay and horses and leather filled the air. "Just let me close up properly, and we can go." Vera watched as he moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking water troughs, securing stall doors, hanging up tools. His movements spoke of years of experience, of a man comfortable in his work and his place in the world. She found herself wondering about him, this stranger who had crossed a street to help someone he did not know. "All right," Reed said after a few minutes. "Let us go meet Ruth and see about getting you settled." They walked through the dusty streets of Deming as the sun continued its descent. The town was small but clearly growing, with new construction visible alongside older adobe buildings. Reed pointed out landmarks as they went: the train depot, the general store, the church, the schoolhouse where Vera would presumably be teaching come Monday. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "Going on 5 years now. Ruth and I came out from Texas after our parents passed. Our younger brother William joined us a year later, but he got restless and headed north to try mining. We hear from him now and then." Reed's voice was matter-of-fact, but Vera heard the underlying affection for his siblings. "What brought you to teaching?" "My father was a schoolmaster," Vera said. "I grew up around books and learning. After he died last year, it seemed like the natural path. The position here was advertised in St. Louis, and I thought—" She paused, unsure how to articulate the complicated tangle of grief and hope and desperation that had driven her west. "You thought a fresh start might help," Reed finished quietly. "Yes." They had reached a small house with a neat fence and a garden that was clearly tended with care despite the dry climate. Reed opened the gate and led Vera up a path lined with stones painted white. Before they reached the door, it swung open, and a woman appeared. Ruth Keller was shorter than her brother, with the same dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that assessed Vera with quick intelligence. She wore a simple dress with an apron over it, and there was flour on her hands. "Reed, who is this?" Ruth asked, but her tone was more curious than accusatory. "This is Miss Vera Thornton, the new schoolteacher. She has been stranded at the stage depot for the past 3 hours because no one from the school board got her telegram about the delay. I thought we might offer her the spare room until she can get matters sorted on Monday." Ruth's expression shifted immediately to one of warm concern. "Of course. Miss Thornton, please come in. You must be exhausted and hungry. Reed, put her bag in William's old room and then wash up for supper. Miss Thornton, can I get you some water? Or perhaps you would like to freshen up first." The rush of hospitality was so genuine and immediate that Vera felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. "Please, call me Vera. And yes, I would appreciate the chance to wash the dust off, if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. Come with me." Ruth led her through a house that was small but impeccably kept. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were touches of hominess everywhere. Curtains at the windows, a quilt draped over the back of a chair, books on a shelf by the fireplace. The spare room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. "I will bring you some fresh water," Ruth said. "Supper will be ready in about half an hour. Nothing fancy, just stew and biscuits, but there is plenty." "It sounds wonderful. Thank you truly. I know this is unusual and I am grateful for your kindness." Ruth smiled, and Vera could see the family resemblance to her brother in the warmth of that expression. "We look after each other out here. It is how we survive." Besides, Reed is a good judge of character. If he thought you needed help, then you did, and if he thought you were trustworthy enough to bring to our home, then you are. After Ruth left, Vera sat down on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The fear and uncertainty that had been building all afternoon receded, replaced by a cautious hope. She thought about Reed Keller, about the way he had noticed her waiting and had finally crossed the street to help. There had been something in his eyes, a kindness that went beyond mere politeness, and she found herself looking forward to supper with an anticipation that had nothing to do with hunger. When she emerged from the room 20 minutes later, washed and with her hair repinned, she found Reed and Ruth setting the table together. They moved around each other with the ease of long practice, and their conversation was punctuated with affectionate teasing. "Vera, come sit down," Ruth said, gesturing to a chair. "Reed was just telling me about your journey from St. Louis. That must have been quite an adventure." "Parts of it were more adventurous than I would have liked," Vera admitted, taking her seat. "The stage broke an axle outside Las Cruces, and we were stuck there for 3 days waiting for repairs." "That stretch of road is terrible," Reed said, setting down a basket of biscuits that were still steaming. They keep saying they are going to improve it, but nothing changes. The stew was rich and flavorful, thick with vegetables and chunks of tender beef, and Vera realized she had not eaten since breakfast, which had been a piece of dried bread and an apple consumed before dawn at the last way station. She tried not to eat too quickly, mindful of manners, but both Ruth and Reed seemed to understand her hunger and pressed second helpings on her without comment. As they ate, Ruth asked about St. Louis, and Vera found herself talking about the city she had left behind, about her father's bookshop and the school where she had sometimes helped teach the younger children. Reed listened more than he spoke, but when he did contribute to the conversation, his comments were thoughtful and often laced with quiet humor. "What made you decide to become a teacher out here?" Ruth asked. "Surely there were positions available closer to home." "There were," Vera admitted. "But they were all in schools where I would have been one of many teachers, just another face in a large system. Here, according to the letter I received, I will be the only teacher for all the children in town. It is a challenge, certainly, but it is also an opportunity to really make a difference." And I wanted. She paused, searching for the right words. "I wanted a place where I could be more than just the woman whose father died and left her alone. I wanted to be Vera Thornton, schoolteacher, not Vera Thornton, the orphan." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Reed met her eyes across the table, and there was understanding in his gaze. "I know something about wanting a fresh start," he said quietly. After supper, Ruth shooed them both out of the kitchen so she could clean up, refusing Vera's offers of help. "You have had a long day. Go sit on the porch and enjoy the evening. It cools down nicely once the sun sets." Reed led Vera outside to a small porch with 2 chairs and a bench. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange and deep purple as the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. The air was indeed cooling, and Vera breathed deeply, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Your sister is very kind," she said. "Ruth is the best person I know," Reed replied simply. "When our parents died, she could have married any number of men who were courting her back in Texas. Instead, she came out here with me to start over. She gave up a lot for family." "Why Deming, the railroad," Reed said. "It was coming through, and we knew that meant growth, opportunity. We had enough money from selling our parents' ranch to start the livery business, and it has done well enough. This town is growing every month. People moving west, businesses starting up. It is a good place to build a life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Vera felt the strangeness of her situation. Here she was, sitting on a porch with a man she had met only hours ago, feeling more at ease than she had in months. Reed Keller was easy to be around, his presence calming rather than unsettling. "Can I ask you something?" Reed said eventually. "Of course. When you were standing there in the street today, waiting, you never stopped watching the road. Even after the second hour, you kept looking, like you believed someone would still come. What made you so certain?" Vera considered the question. "I suppose I was not certain at all," she admitted. "But what else could I do? I had nowhere else to go, no backup plan. I had to believe it would work out because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. That takes courage, or foolishness. Sometimes they are the same thing," Reed said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Either way, I am glad I walked over when I did." "So am I," Vera said softly. The next morning, Sunday, Ruth insisted that Vera accompany them to church. "Everyone will want to meet the new schoolteacher anyway," she said practically. "Might as well get it over with all at once." Vera wore her best dress, a dark blue calico that had survived the journey relatively unscathed, and Ruth lent her a bonnet to protect against the already warming sun. The church was a simple wooden structure, but it was packed with people, and Vera felt a flutter of nervousness as they entered. Reed stayed close to her side as Ruth introduced her to what seemed like half the town. There was Samuel Chen, the school board chairman, who was mortified that his failure to check for telegrams had left her stranded. His wife Marion was equally apologetic and immediately invited Vera to tea the following afternoon. There were families with children who would be her students, ranch owners, shopkeepers, and a dozen others whose names Vera struggled to keep straight. Through it all, Reed remained a steady presence, occasionally offering a quiet comment or clarification that helped her navigate the social landscape. She noticed the way people greeted him with genuine warmth, the way children ran up to show him things, the way the older ladies in the congregation smiled knowingly when they saw him with Vera. After the service, Samuel Chen pulled them aside, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Thornton, I cannot apologize enough for the confusion yesterday. The telegram must have arrived while I was out at the ranch, and my clerk is new and did not think to send someone to find me. We have arranged lodging for you at the boarding house Mrs. Patterson runs. It is all paid for through the school board, and you can move in this afternoon if you like." "That is very generous, thank you," Vera said. "Though I confess I am quite comfortable where I am, if Reed and Ruth do not mind having me a bit longer." She glanced at Reed as she said it and saw something flicker in his expression, something that might have been pleasure or relief. "You are welcome to stay as long as you like," he said. Ruth nodded enthusiastically. "Truly, Vera, you are no trouble at all. In fact, I have been enjoying the company." Samuel Chen looked between the three of them with the knowing expression of someone who had lived in a small town long enough to recognize the beginning of something. "Well, the room at the boarding house will be there whenever you need it. In the meantime, let me give you some information about the school. Classes start Wednesday, which gives you a few days to settle in and prepare." He handed her a folder of papers and proceeded to outline the basics. 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, a schoolhouse that was in good repair, a small budget for supplies and books, and a salary that was modest but fair. Vera listened carefully, asking questions and taking mental notes. As they walked back to the house afterward, Ruth linked her arm through Vera's in a gesture of easy friendship. "You handled that well. I know it can be overwhelming, meeting so many people at once." "It helped having you both there," Vera said. "I think I would have been completely lost otherwise." That afternoon, while Ruth prepared Sunday dinner, Reed offered to show Vera the schoolhouse. "It is not far, and you probably want to see what you are working with before Wednesday." They walked through the quiet Sunday streets, and Vera found herself acutely aware of Reed beside her. In the daylight, she could see details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands from years of physical work, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was handsome in a rugged, unpretentious way, and she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness about her new job. The schoolhouse was a single large room with rows of desks, a blackboard at the front, and windows that let in plenty of light. There was a bookshelf with a modest collection of primers and readers, and a desk for the teacher that was scarred and ink-stained but sturdy. "What do you think?" Reed asked, watching her face as she walked around the space. "I think it is perfect," Vera said honestly. "It is not fancy, but it has everything I need. I can already imagine the children here, learning and growing." She ran her hand along one of the desks, thinking about all the students who had sat here before, all the knowledge that had been passed down in this simple room. This was why she had come west, for this chance to be part of something meaningful. "You really love it, do not you?" Reed said. "Teaching, I mean. I do. My father used to say that education was the greatest gift you could give a person, that it opened doors and created possibilities that would not exist otherwise. I believe that." She turned to face him. "What about you? Do you love what you do?" Reed considered the question. "I love working with horses. There is something honest about it, something straightforward. A horse does not lie or pretend. If you treat them well and understand them, they will give you everything they have. And the business side, building something from nothing, that is satisfying too. So yes, I suppose I do love it." "Then we are both lucky," Vera said, "to have found work that matters to us." "I think I am luckier than most this week," Reed said, and there was something in his voice that made Vera's breath catch. They stood there in the quiet schoolhouse, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Vera felt the moment stretch and deepen. She thought about the past 2 days, about how this stranger had noticed her waiting and had chosen to help. She thought about his kindness, his quiet strength, the way he had made her feel safe and welcome in this new place. "Reed," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. But before she could continue, the door to the schoolhouse burst open, and a young boy came running in, breathless and excited. "Mr. Keller, come quick. There is a horse down by the train depot, and it is going crazy. Pa says you are the only one who might be able to calm it." Reed's expression shifted immediately to one of focused concern. "All right, Tommy, lead the way." He turned to Vera. "I am sorry, I need to go handle this. Will you be all right getting back to the house? Of course, go, be careful." He gave her a quick smile and then was gone, following the boy at a run. Vera stood alone in the schoolhouse, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. She touched her hand to her chest, feeling foolish and giddy and more alive than she had felt in a very long time. When she returned to the house, Ruth took one look at her face and grinned. "Well, well, how was your tour of the schoolhouse?" "The schoolhouse was lovely," Vera said, trying to sound casual. "And my brother, your brother, had to go handle an emergency with a horse." "That is not what I asked," Ruth said, her eyes twinkling. "But I suppose you will tell me when you are ready. Come help me with these potatoes." They worked together in the kitchen, and Ruth regaled Vera with stories of growing up in Texas with Reed and William. "Reed was always the responsible one," she said. "Even as a child, he was the one looking after everyone else. William was wild and restless, and I was headstrong and opinionated, but Reed was steady. After our parents died, he was the one who held us together." "He seems like a good man," Vera said carefully. "He is the best man I know," Ruth replied, "and he deserves happiness. He has spent so much of his life taking care of other people that he has not taken enough time for himself." She paused, then added delicately, "There was a woman a few years back, daughter of one of the ranchers. Reed courted her for almost a year, and everyone thought they would marry. But she decided she wanted to go back east, wanted a more civilized life than Deming could offer. It hurt him, though he never complained." Vera absorbed this information, feeling a pang of sympathy for Reed and, if she was honest with herself, a small selfish relief that the relationship had not worked out. That must have been difficult. It was. But I think he is ready to move forward now. "I have seen the way he looks at you, Vera. I know we have only just met, but I think you are good for him." Before Vera could respond to this startling observation, Reed himself came through the door, dusty and slightly disheveled but looking satisfied. "Got the horse calmed down and safely stabled. Turns out someone tried to ride him with a burr under the saddle, and the poor animal was half mad with pain. He will be all right now." "You are a miracle worker," Ruth said. "Now go wash up. Dinner is almost ready." That evening passed in pleasant conversation and good food. and Vera found herself feeling more at home than she had any right to after only 2 days. When she went to bed that night, in the small room that smelled of lavender and clean linens, she lay awake for a long time thinking about Reed Keller and the unexpected turn her life had taken. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine and the promise of answers. Samuel Chen came by the house early to escort Vera to a meeting with the full school board. Reed had already left for the livery, but Ruth had prepared a substantial breakfast and spent considerable time assuring Vera that everything would go smoothly. The meeting was held in a room above the general store, and in addition to Samuel Chen, there were 3 other board members: a rancher named Thomas Webb, the general store owner Harold Finch, and Marion Chen, who apparently served as the board's secretary and treasurer. They were all welcoming and apologetic about the confusion on Saturday, and they quickly went through the practical details of Vera's employment. "Your salary is $40 a month," Samuel explained, "paid on the 1st of each month. The school year runs from September through May, with a break for Christmas. You are responsible for teaching all subjects to all age groups, which I know is a considerable challenge, but we have confidence in your abilities based on your references." They discussed curriculum, discipline policies, and expectations, and Vera felt her confidence growing. These were practical people who cared about education and wanted the school to succeed. By the time the meeting ended, she had a clear understanding of her responsibilities and a genuine excitement about beginning. "Now, about your accommodation," Marion Chen said as they were wrapping up. "Mrs. Patterson is expecting you at the boarding house whenever you are ready to move in. She has a lovely room set aside for you." "Actually," Vera said, making a decision that surprised even herself, "I wanted to ask about the possibility of renting a small house instead. I have been staying with Reed and Ruth Keller, and Ruth mentioned that there are a few small houses available in town. I would prefer having my own space if it is within my budget." The board members exchanged glances. "There is the old Murphy place," Thomas Webb said slowly. "Small adobe house, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it is in good repair. Owner moved back to Texas last month, and it has been sitting empty. I handle the property management. I could let you have it for $8 a month, including water." Vera did some quick mental arithmetic. $8 a month would leave her with $32 for food, supplies, and savings. It would be tight, but manageable, and the independence would be worth it. "I would like to see it, if I may." An hour later, Vera stood in the doorway of what might become her home. The house was indeed small, but it was charming in its simplicity. The walls were thick adobe that would keep it cool in summer and warm in winter. There was a main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom with a window facing east, and a kitchen with a working stove. The floors were swept clean, and the previous tenant had left behind some basic furniture, a table with 2 chairs, a bed frame, and some shelves. "I will take it," Vera said. Thomas Webb looked pleased. "Excellent. I will have the papers drawn up. You can move in whenever you like." When Vera returned to the Keller house, bubbling with news, she found Ruth in the kitchen and Reed sitting at the table, eating lunch. They both looked up as she entered, and she could not contain her excitement. "I am officially employed as the schoolteacher, and I have rented a house." "A real house of my own," Ruth clapped her hands together. "That is wonderful. Which house?" "The old Murphy place near the church." "Oh, that is a sweet little house," Ruth said enthusiastically. "It will need some fixing up, I imagine, but it has good bones. When do you take possession?" "Immediately, apparently. But I will need to get some supplies, some basic household goods. I have a bed frame but no mattress, and the kitchen is almost empty." "We will help you," Reed said immediately. Ruth has connections with half the women in town. Between them, they will have you set up in no time." He was right. Over the next 2 days, with Ruth coordinating what seemed like a small army of helpful neighbors, Vera's little house transformed from an empty shell into a home. Marion Chen donated a mattress that her daughter had outgrown. The wife of the general store owner appeared with boxes of kitchen supplies. Someone else brought curtains and linens. Reed and another man carried over a rocking chair and a small dresser. Reed himself spent hours at the house, fixing a loose board on the porch, ensuring the stove was working properly, and installing better latches on the windows. Vera found herself watching him work, admiring the competent way he handled tools, the concentration on his face as he made sure everything was secure and safe. On Tuesday evening, the night before school was to start, Vera stood in her little house surrounded by her new possessions and felt a wave of emotion so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She had done it. She had come west alone, had weathered uncertainty and fear, and had built the foundation of a new life. There was a knock at the door, and she opened it to find Reed standing there with a package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said. "A housewarming gift, I suppose." Vera unwrapped the package to find a beautiful wooden sign with carved letters that read Thornton. "For your door," Reed explained, "so everyone knows this is your home." "Reed, this is beautiful. Did you make this yourself?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "I do some carving in my spare time." "It is just a small thing." "It is not a small thing," Vera said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is perfect. Thank you." She stood there holding the sign, looking up at this man who had shown her such kindness, and felt her heart expand with feelings she barely knew how to name. Reed was watching her with an expression that was soft and open, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. "Vera," he said quietly, "I know we have not known each other long, but I want you to know that meeting you, helping you, these past few days have been some of the best I can remember. I would like to continue seeing you if you are amenable to that. I would like to court you properly." Vera felt her heart leap. "I would like that very much." Reed's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "Good, that is very good." He took a step closer. "I know you start teaching tomorrow, and you will be busy getting settled, but perhaps I could call on you this weekend. We could take a walk or have dinner, or whatever you would like." "I would enjoy that," Vera said softly. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, a gesture that was tender and respectful and full of promise. "I should let you get some rest. Big day tomorrow." After he left, Vera sat in her rocking chair and held the wooden sign in her lap, tracing the carved letters with her fingertips. She thought about Saturday afternoon, about standing in the dusty street feeling lost and alone, about looking up to see Reed walking toward her. She thought about how much her life had changed in just a few days, and about the possibility of what might come next. The next morning, Vera woke before dawn, nervous energy propelling her out of bed. She dressed carefully in a practical gray dress with a white collar, pinned her hair up securely, and tried to eat the breakfast she had prepared the night before. Her stomach was a knot of anticipation. The schoolhouse was already unlocked when she arrived, thanks to Samuel Chen, who had promised to open up early. Vera spent an hour arranging desks, writing the day's schedule on the blackboard, and preparing her materials. When the first students began to arrive, shy and curious, she greeted each one by name, having studied the roster the board had provided. By 9 o'clock, 21 of her 23 students were present, ranging from 6-year-old twin girls named Lucy and Lily Martinez to 14-year-old James Porter, who was nearly as tall as Vera herself. She called the class to order, introduced herself, and launched into the day's lessons. Teaching a one-room schoolhouse with multiple age groups was every bit as challenging as she had anticipated, but Vera found herself energized rather than overwhelmed. She moved between groups, giving the older students independent work while she taught the younger ones their letters, then reversing the process. The hours flew by, and before she knew it, it was 3 o'clock and time to dismiss. As the last student filed out, chattering excitedly about the new teacher, Vera sank into her chair and allowed herself a moment of exhausted triumph. She had done it. Her first day was complete, and it had gone well. There was a knock at the door, and she looked up to see Reed standing there, hat in hand. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "I wanted to see how your first day went." Vera felt a rush of warmth at his thoughtfulness. It was wonderful, exhausting but wonderful. "The children are bright and eager, and I think we will do well together." "I never doubted it," Reed said. He stepped into the room and looked around, taking in the evidence of the day's activities. The blackboard covered with notes and problems, the books scattered across desks, the children's drawings pinned to one wall. "This suits you. You look happy." "I am happy," Vera realized. "Happier than I have been in a very long time." "I am glad." Reed hesitated, then said, "I know we had talked about this weekend, but I was wondering if you might have dinner with me and Ruth tonight. Nothing fancy, just a quiet meal. I thought you might be too tired to cook after your first day." The invitation was casual, but Vera heard the hope in his voice. "I would love that. Give me a few minutes to tidy up here, and I will walk over with you." They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Reed would often stop by the schoolhouse at the end of the day, and they would walk together through town, talking about their work and their lives. Sometimes Ruth joined them for dinner, and sometimes Vera cooked simple meals in her own kitchen and invited both Kellers to share them. On Sundays, they attended church together, and slowly the townspeople began to see them as a unit, a couple in the making. Reed courted her with old-fashioned attentiveness. He brought her wildflowers that grew in the hills outside town. He carved her a set of bookends for the school books that were beginning to accumulate in her house. He listened when she talked about her students and her plans for the school year, offering thoughtful observations and genuine interest. Vera found herself falling in love with him, though she was cautious about saying the words aloud. She loved his steadiness, his kindness, the way he made her feel both protected and respected. She loved watching him work with horses, the gentle patience he showed with even the most difficult animals. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and rare. One Saturday in late October, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, Reed suggested they ride out to see the cottonwoods along the Mimbers River. "They will be at peak color right now," he said. "I thought you might enjoy seeing them." Vera had been taking riding lessons from Reed, and though she was still not entirely comfortable on horseback, she trusted him completely. He chose a gentle mare for her and rode beside her on his own horse, a rangy gelding named Copper. The ride took them out of town and into the high desert landscape, past creosote bushes and yucca, with the distant mountains purple against the brilliant blue sky. The air was crisp and clear, and Vera found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. The cottonwoods were spectacular, their leaves turned a bright golden yellow that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Reed led them to a spot by the river where the water ran shallow and clear over smooth stones. He helped Vera dismount, his hands steady on her waist, and for a moment they stood close together, neither moving away. "It is beautiful here," Vera said softly. "Yes," Reed agreed, but he was looking at her rather than the scenery. Vera felt her breath catch. The moment felt weighted with significance, as if they had both been moving toward this point for weeks and had finally arrived. "Vera," Reed said, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something. I know we have not known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life. You have brought something into my world that I did not even know was missing. You have brought light and purpose and joy." He took both her hands in his, and Vera could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, evidence of his nervousness despite his calm exterior. "I love you," Reed said simply. "I love your intelligence and your courage. I love the way you care about your students and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love who I am when I am with you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you if you will let me." Tears were streaming down Vera's face, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked across that street to help me. You saw me when I was lost and alone, and you chose to care. That changed everything for me." Reed pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart. They stood there by the river, surrounded by golden leaves and the gentle sound of water over stone, and Vera felt a sense of rightness so profound it made her dizzy. When Reed finally kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a kiss that spoke of promise and commitment and a future built together. Vera kissed him back with all the love and hope that filled her heart, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing with sheer happiness. "I want to marry you," Reed said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know that is fast, and if you want to wait, I will wait forever, but I am certain of this of us, and I do not want to pretend otherwise." "I am certain too," Vera said. "Yes, Reed Keller, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, making plans and dreaming about their future. Reed wanted to build them a house, something bigger than Vera's little adobe place, with room for the children they both hoped to have. Vera talked about continuing to teach, at least for a few more years, and Reed supported that dream wholeheartedly. They talked about the life they would build together, a life rooted in this frontier town that had brought them together. When they rode back to Deming as the sun was setting, Vera felt transformed. She was no longer a woman alone, uncertain and afraid. She was a woman loved and cherished, with a partner who would walk beside her through whatever came next. Ruth was waiting for them at the house, and she took one look at their faces and let out a whoop of joy. "Finally! I thought you two would never get around to it. When is the wedding?" "Soon," Reed said, grinning. "We want to get married soon." They decided on a December wedding, giving them enough time to make basic preparations, but not so long that they had to wait forever. The news spread through Deming like wildfire, and the entire town seemed to embrace the romance. Vera's students made her drawings and cards congratulating her. The ladies of the church organized themselves to help with the wedding preparations. Even the men at the livery stable teased Reed good-naturedly about finally settling down. Through it all, Vera continued teaching and Reed continued running the livery business, but they spent every spare moment together. Reed began work on their house, a project he tackled with enthusiasm and careful planning. It would be adobe like most buildings in Deming, but larger, with 3 bedrooms and a separate dining room. He consulted with Vera on every detail, making sure the house would be truly theirs. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity and joy. Ruth helped Vera make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in ivory silk that Marion Chen had helped them order from Santa Fe. Samuel Chen agreed to give Vera away, a gesture that moved her deeply. The church was decorated with whatever greenery could be found in the December desert, and Ruth baked a wedding cake that was the talk of the town. On the morning of December 18, 1882, Vera woke in her little house for the last time as Vera Thornton. By evening, she would be Vera Keller, and that thought filled her with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. The wedding ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The church was packed with townspeople who had come to celebrate this union. Vera walked down the aisle on Samuel Chen's arm, her eyes fixed on Reed waiting for her at the altar. He looked handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. He looked at her with such love and wonder that she felt tears prick her eyes. The minister, a kind older man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through joy and hardship. When it came time for the vows, Reed's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love and cherish Vera for the rest of his days. Vera's own voice shook slightly with emotion as she made the same promises to him. When Reverend Matthews finally declared them husband and wife, Reed kissed her with a tenderness that made the congregation sigh. Vera kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope into that moment, and when they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Keller, the applause was thunderous. The reception was held in the church hall, with food contributed by dozens of families and music provided by a local fiddle player and his friends. Vera danced with Reed, with Samuel Chen, with Harold Finch and Thomas Webb, and half a dozen other men from town. She laughed with Ruth and Marion, accepted congratulations and well wishes from her students and their families, and felt embraced by this community that had become her home. As the evening wound down, Reed leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Keller?" "Yes," she said, loving the sound of her new name. They had decided to spend their wedding night in the new house, even though it was not quite finished. Reed had made sure the bedroom was complete and comfortable, with a real bed and linens that Ruth had given them as a wedding present. The rest of the house could wait. Reed carried her over the threshold, and Vera laughed with delight at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in the middle of what would be their living room, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other in the lamplight. "Hello, husband," Vera said softly. "Hello, wife," Reed replied, and then he was kissing her again, deeper this time with a passion that had been carefully restrained during their courtship. Vera responded with equal passion, her hands coming up to frame his face, threading through his hair. They moved together toward the bedroom, learning each other in the intimate way of newlyweds, building the physical foundation of their marriage with tenderness and desire. Later, lying in Reed's arms with her head on his chest, Vera thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about standing alone and frightened on a dusty street, watching for help that seemed like it would never come. She thought about Reed finally walking over to her, offering assistance without expectation of reward. She thought about how one act of kindness had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Reed asked, his fingers trailing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Vera said. "How different my life might have been if you had not walked over to me that day." "I am the lucky one," Reed countered. "You came into my life when I had stopped expecting anything extraordinary to happen. You reminded me what it feels like to hope, to dream, to build something beautiful with another person." "We will have a good life together," Vera said with certainty. "The best life," Reed agreed and kissed the top of her head. As winter turned to spring, Reed finished work on the house, and they moved in fully, filling it with furniture and books and the small treasures that make a house a home. Vera continued teaching, and her reputation as an excellent educator grew. Parents from neighboring ranches began bringing their children into town specifically to attend her school, and the school board approved funds for additional books and supplies. Reed's business at the livery continued to thrive as well. His reputation for being able to handle even the most difficult horses spread throughout the territory, and ranchers would bring animals from miles away for him to train or cure of bad habits. He and Jack Morrison expanded the operation, adding more stalls and hiring a young man to help with the basic work. In late spring, Vera discovered she was pregnant. She told Reed one evening after school had let out for the summer, finding him in the stable working on a new saddle. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Reed looked up, immediately attuned to the excitement in her voice. "Good news, the best news. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Reed just stared at her, and then he was crossing the space between them and lifting her off her feet, spinning her around while laughing. "A baby! Vera, we are going to be parents." "Apparently so," she said, laughing with him. "The doctor says it should be early December, right around our first anniversary." Reed set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be up and walking around? Do you need to sit down?" "Reed, I am pregnant, not dying," Vera said with amusement. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I feel perfectly fine." But Reed's protectiveness only increased as the months passed. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and let him take over more of the household chores. Ruth rolled her eyes at her brother's overprotective behavior, but clearly found it endearing. The townspeople watched Vera's changing figure with interest and approval, and the women showered her with advice and promises of help when the baby arrived. Vera taught through the fall, finally stopping in early November when her expanding belly made it difficult to move around the classroom easily. One of the older students' mothers, a woman named Elizabeth who had some teaching experience, agreed to fill in for the last month before Christmas break. Their daughter was born on December 10, 1883, after a long but ultimately uncomplicated labor. Ruth served as midwife, having helped deliver numerous babies back in Texas, and Reed paced holes in the floor of the living room until Ruth finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter. They named her Rose Victoria Keller, and from the moment Reed held her in his arms, Vera knew she had never seen anyone more deeply in love. He was a devoted father, constantly marveling at his tiny daughter's fingers and toes, her tuft of dark hair, her piercing blue eyes. "She is perfect," he kept saying. "Vera, look at her. She is absolutely perfect." Vera, exhausted but happy, agreed. Rose was perfect, a living symbol of their love and their future. The following years unfolded with the kind of happiness that Vera had once thought only existed in novels. Rose grew into a bright, curious toddler, and Vera returned to teaching when her daughter was old enough to spend days with Ruth, who doted on her niece shamelessly. In 1885, their son was born, a sturdy boy they named Robert James Keller. Reed now had 2 children to dote on, and he approached fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. He taught Rose to ride almost before she could walk, and he carried Robert everywhere strapped to his back, introducing him to horses and the stable from infancy. The livery business expanded again, and Reed took on another partner to help manage the increased workload. This allowed him more time at home with Vera and the children, and those evenings spent together as a family were the sweetest Vera had ever known. In 1887, Vera gave birth to twins, 2 more daughters they named Rachel Marie and Rebecca Ann. The house that had seemed so spacious when Reed first built, it now felt full of life and noise and joy. Ruth, who had finally married a rancher named David Green in 1886, lived nearby and was a constant presence in their lives, helping with the children and maintaining the close bond she had always shared with her brother. As the years passed, Vera watched her children grow and thrive in this frontier town that had become her home. Rose developed a passion for reading and announced at age 10 that she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Robert was his father's shadow, spending every spare moment at the livery learning about horses and business. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into the kind of mischief that made Vera laugh even as she tried to discipline them. Through it all, Vera and Reed's love for each other only deepened. They faced challenges, of course. There were dry years when money was tight, and there was the year when Reed broke his leg badly and could not work for months. There were childhood illnesses that terrified them both, and there were the normal strains of raising 4 strong-willed children and managing busy careers. But through everything, they had each other. Reed still walked over to the schoolhouse at the end of many days, just like he had when they were courting, and they would walk home together holding hands. Vera still marveled at her good fortune, at how a moment of kindness from a stranger had transformed her entire existence. One evening in the summer of 1895, when Rose was 11 and the twins were 8, Vera and Reed sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, but more likely causing some kind of creative chaos. It was a moment of peace in their busy lives, and Vera leaned her head on Reed's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever think about that first day?" Reed asked. "When I saw you standing in the street, looking so lost." "All the time," Vera admitted. "I think about how afraid I was, and how certain I was that I had made a terrible mistake coming west. And then I think about you walking over to me, and how that single moment changed everything." "I almost did not," Reed confessed. "I saw you standing there for nearly an hour before I finally worked up the courage to approach you. I kept telling myself it was not my business, that you probably had someone coming for you, that you would think I was being presumptuous." Vera sat up and looked at him in surprise. "I never knew that. What changed your mind? You did. I watched you standing there, and you never stopped looking hopeful. Even after the second hour, even after it was clear something had gone wrong, you kept watching that road like you believed help was coming. That kind of faith, that kind of determination, I could not just ignore it. I had to at least try to help." "I am so glad you did," Vera said softly. "You saved me that day, Reed, not just from being stranded, but from the loneliness and fear that had been eating at me for months. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Reed insisted. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and existing but not really living. You woke something up in me, something I had thought was dead. You made me want to be better, to do more, to build something lasting." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside, they could hear Rose calling for them, probably to referee some dispute between the twins. They smiled at each other, and hand in hand, they went inside to their children, to their life, to the future they had built together from one moment of connection on a dusty street in Deming, New Mexico. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their growing family. Rose did indeed become a teacher, taking over Vera's position at the schoolhouse when Vera finally retired in 1898. Robert went into business with his father, and together, they expanded the livery into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Rachel and Rebecca both married brothers from a neighboring ranch, and the double wedding they insisted on having was the social event of the season in Deming. Through all these changes, Vera and Reed remained at the center, the foundation upon which their family was built. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. becoming grandparents who spoiled their grandchildren and told them stories of the old days when Deming was still rough and wild. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half the territory. The town of Deming had grown considerably over the decades, transitioning from a frontier settlement to a proper town with paved streets and electric lights. But the church where they had married was still standing, and many of the people who had attended their wedding were still alive and present to celebrate this milestone. As Vera looked around at the crowd, at the life she and Reed had built, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the terrified young woman who had arrived in Deming 30 years ago with nothing but a satchel and a hope that things would work out. She thought about how that woman would hardly recognize her now, surrounded by family and friends, rooted deeply in a community she had helped build and shape. Reed found her standing alone for a moment, lost in thought, and he slipped his arm around her waist. His hair was silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun, but to Vera he was just as handsome as he had been at 32. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said. "Happy anniversary," she replied, turning to kiss him. 30 years. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have been in my life forever, Reed said. Either way, I would not change a single moment. Neither would I, Vera said. Well, maybe the moment when Robert fell off the barn roof and broke his arm, I could have done without that. Reed laughed. Fair enough, but everything else was perfect. As the party continued around them, filled with music and laughter and the voices of people they loved, Vera reflected on the truth of that statement. Their life had not been without hardship or challenge, but it had been perfect in the ways that mattered. It had been full of love and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. She thought about standing in that dusty street all those years ago, watching and waiting, her faith tested but not broken. She thought about Reed watching her from the livery, building up the courage to approach. She thought about that moment when he finally walked over, when their eyes met and something clicked into place, something that would sustain them through 3 decades and counting. That night, after the party had ended and their children and grandchildren had gone home, Vera and Reed lay in bed together as they had on their wedding night, holding each other close. "Thank you," Vera whispered in the darkness. "For what?" Reed asked. "For seeing me, for walking over, for choosing to care about a stranger who needed help, for every day since then." Reed pulled her closer. "Thank you for waiting, for having faith that someone would come, for letting me love you, for building this beautiful life with me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other against the odds and had created something extraordinary from that unlikely beginning. The years continued their steady march. Vera and Reed grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching new generations of children play in the streets of Deming, and they told stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Rose took over the livery business when Robert decided to move his family to California in 1920, breaking convention by becoming one of the few female business owners in New Mexico. The twins continued to live nearby, their families intertwining with the Keller family until it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. In 1925, on a warm September evening, Reed passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. Vera held his hand as his breathing slowed and then stopped, and though her heart broke, she was grateful that he had gone peacefully, surrounded by love and the evidence of a life well lived. She lived for 3 more years, staying in the house Reed had built for them, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to tell the story of how she and Reed had met, never tiring of the details, never losing sight of how miraculous it had been. On a crisp December morning in 1928, just 10 days before what would have been her 46th wedding anniversary, Vera passed away sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the street where Reed had first walked to her. Her family found her there, peaceful and smiling, and they knew she had gone to be with the man she had loved for more than 4 decades. They buried her next to Reed in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Deming, and the entire town turned out for the funeral. Her great-grandchildren, some of whom had never known a world without cars and airplanes and radio, listened as the older generations told stories about the brave young schoolteacher who had come west alone and the kind cowboy who had noticed her waiting and decided to help. The house Reed built still stood for many years after, eventually becoming a historical landmark in Deming. The schoolhouse where Vera taught became a museum. The livery stable evolved with the times, eventually becoming a garage for automobiles, but the Keller name remained on the sign. But more than buildings or businesses, what Vera and Reed left behind was a legacy of love and family, of choosing kindness and building something lasting. Their descendants spread throughout New Mexico and beyond, carrying with them the story of how their great-great-grandparents met, how a moment of compassion on a dusty street in 1882 had created ripples that spread across generations. And in the retelling of that story, in the way it was passed down through the years, the message remained clear, that seeing someone who needs help and choosing to walk over, choosing to care, choosing to act on compassion rather than ignoring it, can change not just one life but many lives. That love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances if we are brave enough to reach out, to take a chance, to believe that something beautiful might be possible. The story of Vera and Reed became part of Deming's history, a reminder of the town's origins and the people who had built it. But more than that, it became a testament to the power of human connection, to the way a single decision made in a moment of kindness can echo through time, creating waves of love and family, and belonging that spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined on that hot September afternoon, when a cowboy at the livery watched a woman wait for 3 long hours and finally decided to walk over and offer his help. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to all who came after them. The understanding that we are never truly alone if we have the courage to reach out, and that the most extraordinary journeys often begin with the simplest acts of human kindness.